The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. We are going to talk about how you can leverage RTB in 2019. We're just a couple of weeks away from the new year, which is kind of crazy that we're going to ring in 2019 here soon. But we wanted to go through this great presentation today. And on the line, I have Joe Jost, who is our VP of Business Development, and he's going to go through the content today. So thank you, Joe, for joining us. Just a couple housekeeping pieces. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please type them in the questions box or the chat box. We will attempt to get to them during the presentation today. If we are unable to get to all questions, we will definitely follow up with an answer via email within the next day or so. Also, we will be recording this webinar, and so we will send this out within the next day. So please feel free to share it with colleagues, friends, others as well. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Joe Jost to take us through today's content. Thanks so much, Joe.
Awesome. Thank you, Kenzie. Hi, everyone. Joe Jost, as Kenzie mentioned here, VP of Business Development and Sales at AdTaxi. So just really quickly want to say a quick thank you to each of you for taking the time out of your day to really dive into, I think, the current state of display advertising in 2018. I'm excited to talk to everybody today. I think I've done a couple of these in recent weeks or months. I did do the state of video not too long ago. So hopefully we have a couple people who have had a chance to see both of these. But banner ads, I think, are perhaps one of the most well-known, probably seemingly commoditized and perhaps polarizing platforms available to us as advertisers. But as much as we think we know the whole story about these ads, I'd like to dig into it and see if we shouldn't really recalibrate our line of thinking. Now, RTB refers to real-time bidding, which is the buying and selling of advertising programmatically through the exchanges, right? So for all intents and purposes, RTB internally at AdTaxi refers to display advertising. So that's kind of the framework for today. Now, looking at the agenda, I'm going to kick off with some, I think, common complaints of display. I think it only makes sense to hit these complaints head on or talk about that elephant in the room. But I believe many of these are actually misconceptions, these complaints, rather than true issues. Then we'll go ahead and talk about RTB display and how it has two extremely effective uses. I think the first is to build audiences, and then the second is to drive that intent to convert, which I think a little bit of a departure from the line of thinking off the legacy expectation of display and RTB. And then from there, we'll go ahead and discuss how display integrates with and ultimately propels other channels like search, social, video, et cetera, and dig into the benefits that come from all of this, which is first-party data, before we wrap up for the day. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump right in. So what you see here is the very first banner ad that launched on Hotwire.com on October 27th, 1994 on behalf of AT&T. I like to start off a little history lesson. At that time, back in 1994, advertising online, it generally didn't exist. Search engines like Google, they weren't formed yet. Google was actually founded in 1998. And so the World Wide Web was probably more like the Wild Wild West. In these early days, advertisers had no idea how this technology would perform, or honestly, if it was even legal. They didn't pay attention to traffic metrics like impressions and clicks too much. They didn't have any kind of pacing applied to it. There was no standardization, essentially, with which to sell these ads. So the first display ads were sold at a flat rate of $10,000 because the cost of advertising in Wired magazine was $10,000. And what's crazy is that there were no traffic requirements for this 10,000 bucks. And furthermore, many advertisers, they didn't even have web pages or websites yet. So agencies that were building these creative assets, like the one that you see here, were simultaneously building basic websites on behalf of their advertisers as well. So like I said, this was kind of the wild, wild west. And the challenge that AT&T and other early adopters had was to essentially educate the general public to actually click on these banners, as you can see by kind of the not so subtle call to action that that you see on this display ad right here. But this was the early days before the Googles, the Yahoos, the Dog Piles, the Ask Jeeves, et cetera, of the world essentially indexed the internet. And so the only way to get to an advertiser's website was to type their URL directly into the browser. But now, clearly, there was this new type of advertising with new technology that allowed you to click through directly to a website. So clearly that novelty generated interest, because the campaign that you see here, this first AT&T campaign, it generated a 44% click-through rate, which is pretty staggering. But how those times have changed, right? I think it's safe to say that the novelty around banners has clearly subsided, and if anything, their reputation might in fact actually be kind of tarnished. Tarnished, excuse me. These days, advertisers, I think they probably feel lucky to achieve something like a 0.44% click-through rate, much less anything that comes close to that 44% click-through rate that AT&T saw 25 years ago. Now, along with low click-through rates, there's a wide variety of complaints, which includes anything from too many ad positions to too slow of load times to concerns around fraud and bot traffic and viewability and whether or not people actually see these ads. I think banners and fraud and all these topics I just mentioned has been brought up, even recently in the past few years. So I get it. I recognize that banner ads, they aren't the sexiest. With Google, Facebook, Snapchat, and a host of other platforms out there, there's plenty of other new shiny objects. But the point that I want to get to today is that banners can, in fact, be extremely effective if they're used correctly. That legacy expectation of display advertising is that it should be used to generate clicks, right? That AT&T ad was all about generating clicks. But 1994 was 25 years ago. Technology has evolved, and that line of thinking to generate clicks, right, is now obsolete. So just look at the image on the right. What you see there is actually the website that the AT&T ad clicked through to back during that first campaign. So clearly times have changed. I think it's up to us to kind of evolve with those times as well. So what does banner advertising and RTB look like today? And I think that what it boils down to is if we understand that that legacy expectation of driving clicks is obsolete, we recognize that there are two kind of dual purposes of RTB. The first is to build audiences, and this makes use of engagement metrics that matter, and all of it being used to build up first-party data, which is that holy grail of data that we can use and slice and dice in a variety of ways to our benefit as advertisers. And then the second piece is using RTB to drive intent, essentially take those audiences that we've built and move them through the funnel to the point of conversion. And we do this by making use of really segmented and layered retargeting strategies, audience segmentation. So this is a great way to kind of take advantage of the first-party data that we generate. And then after we've built these audiences and figured out how to drive intent, how can we do it in the most efficient and cost-effective way as possible through dynamic bid adjustments, recency and frequency bid adjustments, and kind of our quantum optimization layer. So I think those are kind of the two ways that we view banner advertising and RTB as being kind of a 2.0 essentially here in 2018, 2019. Now, how does it work in action? And I think that what you see here is kind of a basic flow chart for how I view a client's or an advertiser's website to work. Now, I feel like a website should be kind of an extension of any business. If the business that you offer is about developing lead generation, then the website should be designed to do that. If it's about generating e-commerce and online sales, then the website should be set up to do just that. If it's about generating brand awareness, then the website should be used to deliver information and create that awareness. So in any situation, I feel like a website essentially can be a tool, a very useful tool for us as advertisers. But how we look at how people come into the website and interact with us, I think is where a lot of us leave probably a lot of business intelligence or a lot of information on the table that we can perhaps use to our benefit. Now, if a person comes into the website and they just visit our homepage, or they just visit one page and they just leave or bounce, essentially that is a non-engaged site visit, and I don't really care about those people. If anything, I ignore those people because they're not showing any likelihood to purchase or any propensity to convert from me as an advertiser. They're showing no engagement, obviously, with kind of my goods or the services that I offer. But if a person comes to the website and instead clicks around on multiple pages, or they're viewing product description pages or vehicle description pages, or certain sections that we or I as a business owner have identified as being very important to my business, now that is information that's very valuable to me. That engaged site visit is kind of that extra step beyond just visiting the site and bouncing. So that engagement becomes something that's very valuable to me, and as a result, that becomes the goals for our efforts towards building audiences. Now, essentially, I want to find people who come to my site and engage, and then find more people who look like those folks so that they can come and engage. And now once we've essentially built that audience, like I mentioned a second ago, it's about taking that person and moving them through the path to conversion. So understanding the different touch points and the different conversion metrics that can take place on site, that could be form fills, phone calls with enabled phone call tracking, visiting the maps and directions pages, the contact us pages, essentially all things that are signs of intent to purchase from us, that then becomes the goals for our efforts towards driving intent. And so here you see, a second ago, I talked about the dual purposes of display essentially being building audiences and driving intent. And clearly you can see how engaged site visits can lead to conversion and essentially satisfy both those roles. Now, here we have an opportunity to apply this methodology to a campaign. And when we do this, we end up seeing really, great results. So this right here is a case study for a national shoe retailer that has over 2,500 locations across the country. This client, they essentially used only Quantum RTB with us and essentially allowed our teams to do their best work. They said, hey, use your methodology, use your ideology to the best of your ability, and make sure that you're achieving these two goals: to build audiences and drive intent. So we use the best available targeting, made sure to suppress out any known shoppers or website visitors. And when I say suppress out these people, it means that if we have data, which could be lists of past purchasers or past customers or anything like that, or it could be pixel activity of people who have visited your site that we've been able to track because of that pixel or that tag that's on your site. Essentially, we remove those from our efforts towards building audiences. Those people are already aware of this shoe brand, right? So as a result, they don't need to be given awareness messaging to come back. If anything, we should set those people aside and put them into our retargeting funnel to drive that intent. But essentially, once we've suppressed these people to focus on new customer acquisition, we then further segmented the audience based on subsequent actions that took place on that website. So this is what would be called a layered strategy, complete with flexible bidding model that factored in the quality of that audience and the time decay between touch points and conversion. And ultimately, we were able to deliver a significant amount of new and incremental business, increasing the return on ad spend 5x from the start to the finish. And actually, between months 2 and 3, we increased that return on ad spend by a further 3x. So clearly, we're showing that we're improving cost per acquisition, and we're improving return on ad spend over time. Now, this was a very intense, very large campaign, but it utilized the best that our ops teams and technology had to offer. And essentially, it proved out that RTB on its own can be a key driver of revenue and results if used correctly. Now, I think this comes as a far cry, I think, from probably many people who are sitting in on this webinar thinking, okay, banners are great, right? But essentially, I see them, I don't necessarily click on them, or I see them and I don't necessarily take further action on it. But the proof is essentially, in the pudding, and I'll get to all of this. Now, the technology that we use then becomes pretty critical to understanding how we can be so successful here. Now, one piece of technology that we use is called view-through technology. And essentially, it applies the same logic as almost like a billboard on the side of the road. Now, that legacy expectation that I've talked about a few times in terms of clicks, right? A person sees an ad, they click on it, and after clicking that ad, that click is recorded and it gets incorporated into their click-through rate, right? But the fact is that the average person served about 1,700 banners per month, and only 8% of online users account for 85% of all online clicks. So if we're optimizing any of our campaigns to clicks, essentially, you're basically optimizing to that 8% of users who are accounting for those clicks. Essentially, you're optimizing to a significant minority of people. And if you're making business decisions off of those clicks and off of that minority of folks, you could be, making either skewed decisions or not necessarily taking into account the whole picture. View-through technology is our solution for that. In this instance, a person is shown an ad, and let's say they do not click on it. They could, at that point, that exact same moment, open up a brand new web browser and go to the advertiser's website. Or a few hours later on their lunch break or when they get home from work, they could visit the advertiser's website by going to Google or putting it in any kind of search bar or anything like that. Or later on the week, you're watching TV with your spouse and your kids or something like that. You pull out your cell phone and then visit the advertiser's website. In each of those scenarios, that view that led to and ultimately resulted in a website visit gets recorded as a view. And whereas that person never clicked on the ad, we now know that that ad did in fact serve as a touch point or a mental reminder, a top of mind awareness touch point, et cetera, to get a person to come to the advertiser's website. And like I said a second ago, it follows the same logic as a billboard on the side of the road. You drive by billboards all the time, but how many times do you actively pull out your phone as soon as you're driving by it and you call for those services that are offered? Speaking for myself, it happens very rarely, even though I do make mental notes and I have used the services that I see on those billboards. So view through technology is essentially that same solution that gives basically attribution and credit to the to our advertising, no matter where, no matter when they visit the website. The second piece of this would be utilizing cross-device attribution. The fact is that 90% of customers, they start a task on one device and then they finish it on another. And that 85% of consumers expect a seamless experience across all channels. Now, the way that we can do this is essentially understand that people own multiple devices. They sign into multiple devices using the same credentials. So for example, I have a laptop, a MacBook, I have an iPhone, I have Apple TV, I have an iPad, and in each of those, I'm logged in using my Apple ID. Similar credentials for Google-based and Android-based devices, etc. Right? And essentially, in this instance, what happens is that if a person, let's say, views an ad on their laptop, but then ultimately goes to the advertiser's website on their smartphone at a later date or purchases on their smartphone or their laptop, essentially we can give credit, we can pass back that credit to the first ad, that initial ad that was served via the laptop. And that becomes basically an attribution funnel, and again gives us further effectiveness and further credit towards the ads that have been served. And so gone are the days of that last click attribution where Google essentially or the search engines would essentially get all the credit for all the other advertising, because essentially once a person was ready to purchase, they'd go to Google, they type in the URL or the service into the search bar, they'd click and then they'd convert. Now we can pass all that credit back to the devices and the ads that are due credit based on view through targeting as well as cross-device attribution. Now, understanding, right, that display can make use of all these different pieces of technology, it's also important to understand that we believe that there's an importance of focusing more on the metrics that matter and defining those dynamically based off of the client goals and the specific areas and sections of your website. Too often, I think advertisers focus on that bottom funnel conversion, right? They want to increase enrollment or increase the number of applications or sell more of X, Y, and Z or increase the number of leads. And so we get hyper-focused on those things, right? Those conversions. But what happens is if we start higher up the funnel, right? Focusing on awareness, engagement, conversion, essentially focusing on that customer journey, we can then pay attention to those metrics that matter. And what we believe and what we have found is that by focusing on those upstream metrics, we have the ability to influence and increase the number of downstream conversions. And I'll showcase this a little bit more in a second, but why this is so critical and important to display is because display is a truly full funnel platform, right? We can use display to generate awareness, but then we can tweak the copy and we can change the creative the physical creative to then be more specific to certain sections or certain areas of the website that a person has visited. And then from there, we can go ahead and even create dynamic creative, which is specific to the goods and products that a person has viewed. And then from there, we're able to even change the creative through our retargeting strategy to focus on promotions, et cetera. And so what we have here is display, a platform which is generally thought of as maybe kind of an awareness vehicle that is now spanning the entire funnel from awareness all the way through to conversion and retention. And again, while display spans the full funnel, other products like video and search and social and native advertising, they might be a little bit more rigid in the areas on the funnel that they line up with. So the display then has a perfect opportunity to supplement the efforts of those platforms as well. And later on in today's presentation, I'll talk about how display can really improve the overall metrics for a campaign in a true omni-channel campaign for an advertiser. But going back to those upstream engagements, how they fuel downstream conversions, I just wanted to talk about how, or show you a quick data visualization of this in action. So in this particular instance, the client's goal was they wanted to increase online price quotes. They knew that if they increased online price quotes, they would sell more cars. There was a direct relationship between those two buckets. And so we did that. We did that. Up through, call it the first 50 or so days of the campaign, we focused on online price quotes. But we weren't necessarily getting the results that we were looking for. Again, because we felt that we were focusing on that bottom conversion as opposed to kind of the engagement metrics that take place up top. So we went back to the client and we said, at day 52 mark, instead of focusing on that ultimate conversion, let us focus more instead on an engagement metric that we believe has a trickle-down effect to conversions, and that would be VDP visits, or vehicle description page visits. We believe that if we could get more people to view the vehicle description pages for this particular client, then that would organically lead to more price quotes. And if we can increase the number of price quotes in that capacity, then that should sell more cars. And what you see on the right-hand side is, I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but you can see it, right? You can see how the number of VDP visits increased and the number of price quotes subsequently increase as well. I think to the left of the line, you have maybe a high water mark of about 4 price quotes. To the right of that line, you see anywhere from 8, 10, and a smattering of more price quotes that come with it. So I feel like this is a good showcase of kind of our logic in action. Now, we focus on view through technology and capabilities. We've focused on cross-device attribution and really the importance in both of these tactics towards measurement, right, of an entire audience. So what we've done through those technologies and paying attention to the metrics that matter is that we've been able to build this audience on behalf of our advertisers. And when we do that, essentially it gives us kind of the best thing, the best group of people, the best target audience to work from to eventually drive results. So in doing this, we've been able to suppress out that known pixel activity or that consumer data that we know of, making sure that when we build an audience, essentially we are focusing exclusively on new acquisition or driving new people to that site. Because we've been able to reach out to new people, new prospects coming to your site, essentially we're maintaining that reach and frequency against unknown audiences. But then also through metrics that matter, we're paying attention to that journey rather than that destination. And as a result of that, we're building brand familiarity through the funnel. And because we've done that, right, too often I see people playing, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, at the very bottom of the funnel trying to convert. But when you do that and you don't pay attention to that journey, essentially you put yourself in a position where you have no brand familiarity. There's no enticement, right? There's no benefit for a person to purchase from you as opposed to the advertiser that's paid attention to the customer journey. And as a result, you might have to overpay for those impressions and for those conversions, ultimately really hurting your cost per acquisition. So by paying attention to that journey and building that brand familiarity through the funnel, essentially we've poised ourselves for success at that point of conversion. And in all of this, we've been able to grow first-party data of qualified, engaged audiences, people who have come to your website, they've clicked around on multiple pages, they've visited sections that are very important to you as an advertiser, and they've shown a kind of a propensity to convert, which we feel would be fundamental towards moving them into the next phase or phase 2. But these are those benefits of building audiences. So just like I mentioned, that next transition then is about taking that audience that you've built, right, those ideal consumers, and moving that interest to conversion, right? Essentially driving that intent. And this can be done in a variety of different ways. The first is that we essentially segment the previous site visitors by value. So understanding that, sure, an engaged visitor is important to us. But if that engaged visitor comes back to our site and now clicks around on further product pages, right? Now that person has shown even more signals of intent to us. Now, and then if that person has taken a further step, right, now they've gotten to our shopping cart and they've either abandoned or they're kind of mulling about right there, that person is even more valuable to us as advertisers. And so in doing this, we're essentially assigning that value based off of that segmentation that's taking place. And because they're more valuable to us, we're willing to bid more, right? Understanding RTB, like I kicked this off, it's buying and selling programmatically. It is an auction environment. So essentially, if we understand that a person is important to us, then we want to essentially make sure that we're bidding appropriately to win that conversion. And then the last piece would be making sure that we're aligning the creative with that value and with that bidding strategy. And just a second ago, I talked about how display is that full funnel product, and we can use generic interest creative, dynamic creative, enticing offers or promos creative, et cetera, to make sure that we're lining up with each of these different segments of our bidding strategy. So that transition from building an audience to driving intent, I think is pretty critical. But audience segmentation, I just want to be really clear about how this works and what it is, because this truly is where we find the most efficiencies and where we can do the best at driving a qualified audience, while also finding maybe perhaps gaps in our in the workflow, in our website, as well as just finding great learnings from our website, because again, this is all about developing first-party data. So the fact is that with audience segmentation, essentially, we've already understood that we want to get that engaged visitor. Now, once we have a group of engaged visitors, we expect that through our retargeting strategy and through our creative, they will take that next step and go to further engagements, right? Could be location pages or contact us pages. And then from there, they could go to take further engagements like form fills and newsletters until we ultimately get to the point of conversion. But it's important to understand that with each, as we reduce, right, as we go further in this audience segmentation to the point of conversion, there is attrition that takes place. People will drop off. We will not get 100% of our engaged visitors to come to our location pages, and then we'll not get 100% of our location page visitors to come and fill out a form fill, and nor will we get 100% of those people to come and ultimately convert. So essentially, we want to understand, what are the relationships between these different segments? What is the rate in which people are moving into these different segments? And then also, if there's any significant drop-off in these segments, what does that tell us? For instance, if we move, say, 80% of our engaged visitors to the location page, but then we move only 5% of that remaining people from the location pages to our form fills, well, then that tells me something, right? That tells me that either there's some kind of barrier to entry, meaning that there could be too much personal information being asked. The links could be buried in the website. The links might be broken and not, passing through traffic to the proper conversion goal or conversion event, et cetera. So this allows us to essentially troubleshoot and kind of perform triage on our websites as well. So again, this first-party data, yes, it's great towards building kind of an ideal audience and moving them to the path of conversion, but it also tells us where things are falling short and what tweaks we might have to make to our website in terms of content on it, or troubleshooting of links and other tech pieces on it. From there, then, understanding that audience segmentation is a critical piece, then we layer in retargeting. Retargeting, it's everybody, I think, understands it and knows what it is and probably feels like they have a good grasp on it. But essentially, applying retargeting to a layered strategy like that is where we really start to find some of these efficiencies. Now, I thought it was pretty interesting how seemingly commoditized retargeting is, and yet how effective it is even today. Just looking at some of these statistics, the first, that website visitors who are retargeted with display ads are 70% more likely to convert. And even in kind of prepping this webinar, I was reading just a couple different case studies on retargeting. One business owner mentioned that of people that come to their website, only 2% of online transactions occur from first-time visitors. The remaining 98% of online transactions occur from repeat visitors. So retargeting was critical to this business owner, as you can see in these statistics here. The second statistic, 91% of marketers who use retargeting have found it to perform same as or better than other platforms like search, email, and even other display ads. And then, and admittedly, as we were kind of auditing campaigns for this as well, we find the exact same thing. Retargeting is consistently one of the best, if not the best, ad group that we see performing at all times. And that's all well and good, conversion metrics and how it performs relative to other platforms. But to me, what about the audience, right? What about that user experience? 3 out of 5, or 60% of online viewers notice and consider ads showing products they viewed from another page. I think this all comes to that personalization. If you've seen and been shopping, I think we can all say that we've probably been shopping here in Q4 holiday. Probably more often than not, we are being retargeted almost constantly, and we're probably noticing those ads again because we are purchasing them or we are considering them for our family and friends, etc. Now, applying that logic, right? Applying view-through targeting, applying cross-device attribution, paying attention to the metrics that matter, building those audiences, and then even from there, further segmenting that out into additional layers. That's all important strategy. And I think that's the best way to really parse out first-party data for us. But once we've done this, right, and now we have our strategy being executed kind of and being set up the way that I've just described it, now it's about finding efficiencies and how do we find or develop the best cost per acquisition, the best return on ad spend on behalf of our clients. And it's all down to finding those efficiencies in our bidding structure. So the first is going to be recency pricing for retargeting. The assumption is essentially that the number of days that pass after an initial site visit essentially leads to a decline in the likelihood of a person purchasing. So those first days, those first hours and days after a person has visited your website, those are critical to you because that person is much more likely to convert at that point rather than say, 10, 20, 30, 50 days down the road. As a result of that person being more likely to convert from you, we are willing to bid more. We might bid 150, 200% higher than we would normally do that in order to win that impression against that quality identified audience. As time goes on, however, we will scale. We will essentially kind of create a tiered bidding structure for retargeting. And as a person, as they reach, day 14, day 30, day 60, whatever it might be, we'll still bid in that audience, but we will bid significantly less, maybe 10%, maybe 20% of our original bids, because again, they're still important to us, just not as important to bid at the same rate, right? Again, we're essentially signing value based on that time decay that's elapsed. The interesting thing here is that because we are a budget-based and a performance-based business, we allow ourselves that flexibility on your behalf to be able to find these efficiencies. If, however, you're running with, a competitor who is an impression-based business, essentially saying, we will run your retargeting and we'll do, X number of impressions at call it $10 CPM, they do not give themselves the flexibility to be able to overbid or underbid to understand and identify those efficiencies. Again, because this is an auction, that flexibility allows us to win without necessarily overpaying, because we're only overpaying for those, folks, those people, those consumers who are likely to convert. And essentially those conversions offset any of our overbidding. So like I said, this is a recency price adjustment for retargeting, taking into account the amount of time that has passed after visiting an advertiser's website. But the same logic also holds true for frequency, right? The number of retargeted ads that a person has seen. So essentially, after the first retargeted ad and the second retargeted ad that a person has seen is much more valuable to us as advertisers and you as business owners than, say, the 50th, 60th, 100th retargeted ad that person has seen. And as a result, we will bid very similarly to like what you see here. Again, an impression-based company selling X number of impressions at a $10 CPM will not have that flexibility to account for the frequency bid adjustments as well. Taking it then and even a step farther, I'm sure many of you on the phone have heard about Quantum, right? And Quantum is essentially our own, we created it, our proprietary algorithmic optimization layer. And essentially this helps us to find efficiencies in the campaign across all kinds of ad groups, targeting, creative, and platforms, essentially to arrive at that best cost per acquisition. This is essentially an optimization layer that exists in real time, sitting on top of our campaigns to allow us to find the efficiencies that allow us to further improve cost per acquisition. And here's how this works. Essentially, a campaign is set up, and for all intents and purposes, this is a very simplified version, but we'll have 5 ad groups, 5 audience targets, all set up with their initial budgets, and their goal is to bring, as in this instance, as many form fills as possible. This could be form fills, this could be product description page visits, this could be newsletter signups, this could be conversions, whatever it might be. But essentially, we started off as kind of an initial setup. Once the campaign starts, essentially each of the different audience targets, each of the different ad groups will start performing differently. They'll start pacing differently based off of how they're bidding and how they're performing. And essentially what you see here is that after the first couple of weeks, these ad groups have run, their cost per form fill, that cost per acquisition, is dynamic based off of their performance. And so we're understanding that some of these ad groups are performing better or worse than others. In this particular instance, the lookalike data and the retargeting data is performing better than, say, the other 3 remaining ad groups. And as a result of that, what Quantum does is it essentially takes outstanding budget, right, from the worst performing ad groups and funnels it into the ad groups that have the best performance, with the logic being that if their performance is best, we want to make sure that we're giving it more budget to essentially put gasoline on the campaign and give it make it as effective of a campaign as possible. Now, essentially, this is all well and good, but this particular visualization that I just showed you was just talking about audience targets. The fact is that Quantum optimizes everything. I even just mentioned that that was a very simplified version of what it looks like. So what Quantum does is it's looking at audience targets, pacing, the different ad groups, the different creative sizes, the different creative messaging, all the different KPIs that are being bundled into the campaign, networks and exchanges, time of day, day of week, et cetera. And there's plenty more. So whether that be manual or automated processes, Quantum is essentially juggling all of these things with the goal of driving an improved cost per acquisition and a better return on ad spend. What's important to call out, though, is that I think, and the reason I even put this here is because to client and sales, right? When we are speaking with you in your office or discussing campaign performance, essentially, I even described it in the last slide about how Quantum shifts budget. Essentially, optimization translates into moving budget to top performers. But for ops, and the reason I talked about bid adjustments and kind of gave you a peek behind the curtain there is because what ops is doing is they're looking at all of these, right? They're looking at the audience targets, they're looking at the creatives, they're looking at the networks, and they're essentially finding where they can bid to win against these quality audience segments in the most efficient way possible. So rather than say, as simple as it sounds, just shuffling budget to different ad groups, what they're finding is they're shuffling budget, but they're looking to bid to win against these audience segments based off of that kind of value that's been assigned where they are in terms of building an audience or driving intent. So we've just taken a look then at how RTB Quantum finds efficiencies across a wide variety of data sets, including those audience targets, ad groups, creative, et cetera, just talked about them. But in finding those cost efficiencies, it has a trickle-down effect to the campaign's bottom line performance. So rather than, I think, showcasing a particular case study here, instead what we wanted to do is just analyze 9,000 or so campaigns across programmatic and social media. Programmatic itself was further broken out into display, native, and pre-roll. And so we have a really good look at, I think, how Quantum performs against non-Quantum campaigns. Remember, Quantum being a proprietary technology that AdTaxi has here. So we employed a data scientist who poured through all the campaign results, and in every single instance, the cost per acquisition for Quantum campaigns outperformed the cost per acquisition for non-Quantum campaigns. And what you can see here, specifically, if you want, note how display actually carried the second lowest cost per acquisition, only behind native, and they were actually pretty darn close. So worth noting, we further looked at the cost per acquisition difference for 2 of our top categories, automotive and e-commerce, and we found the same correlation that Quantum campaigns performed better than non-Quantum campaigns. Now, I know today's webinar is all about RTB, and it's more specifically about display, but this is significant because Quantum is a huge differentiator for AdTaxi, and applying its logic to display campaigns, as well, of course, as all of our other campaigns, clearly, I think, finds nuances in a campaign that allows us to get more bang for the advertiser's buck. So again, we've looked at all these different pieces of technology, view through, cross-device, metrics that matter. We've looked at audience segmentation, paid attention to the different bid adjustments that can take place, as well as kind of a layered strategy towards retargeting to moving a person through the funnel. Now, all of that, like I mentioned, is about driving intent. That is the second of the dual purposes of RTB here in 2019. And what this does, right, it allows us to stay top of mind through key decision-making events. It helps us to understand audience segments, to generate business intelligence and that path to conversion analysis. So essentially understanding how people are moving on your website, digging into Google Analytics or whatever analytics software that you use, and identifying the attrition that's taking place from different sections of your site as well, and essentially use that to benefit you as an advertiser, essentially leveraging that brand familiarity to win conversions at the right price, and essentially identifying those win bid efficiencies within quality audience segments to improve cost for acquisition, return on ad spend. Again, just like building audiences though, we want to use those key findings, develop that first party data, and essentially use that to develop lookalike target seeds for future campaigns. So I mentioned earlier, first party data really is kind of that holy grail. So being able to understand how people are segmented on your site, how people are moving through your site and converting, and then using those people as seeds to find lookalike audiences who look like this group of people, to bring them into your site and further accelerate sales velocity, et cetera. That becomes a key benefit of this entire strategy. Now, a few minutes ago in that analysis of those 9,000 campaigns, right, that data pool that I was referencing, I noted how Quantum Display's cost per acquisition, how low it was, and I essentially highlighted how it was second only to Native's advertising's cost per acquisition. Essentially, I was alluding to the fact that Display's performance when layered into an omni-channel, multi-platform campaign can be a big component in terms of improving overall campaign results. The fact is that Display is that full funnel product that I've mentioned. It can be used to generate awareness. Retargeting can drive the intent to the point of conversion. Dynamic creative can be a great tool to remind audiences of those exact products or those exact services that they've seen. So because of this, Display can integrate seamlessly into a larger digital campaign and supplement all those different efforts. And when optimized to the metrics that matter, oftentimes we'll see that those overall performances of the campaign improves. So let's just kind of take a look at this. This is an example to kind of emphasize that point. This is a multiple location hospitality client that we work with. They ran 23 separate campaigns that used a combination of display, search, and social, with the goal of increasing lead gen efforts while simultaneously reducing the cost of high quality leads. So essentially they were looking to increase in quality of the leads while also reducing that cost it took to acquire them. So a volume and a cost per acquisition play here. Over the course of 3 months, we essentially found that RTB was consistently the best performer in driving low cost, high quality leads. You can see it on the chart here. It's in orange there. Its conversion rate was 70% better than search and 47% better than social. So view through cross-device technology was a major component in being able to track the full effectiveness of these display ads. And specifically within RTB, the retargeting ad group, as I mentioned a few times now, was the best performer overall. So ultimately, you can see this, Display's low cost per conversion drove overall campaign cost per down. And if we had removed Display from the campaign entirely, the overall cost per conversion for that entire campaign would have increased by 20%. So we're just about done. I think this is the last slide here, basically. And one thing that you've likely noticed throughout the presentation is that continuous reference to generating first-party data. I keep saying it, right? But first-party data, it's that holy grail. It comes from that on-site pixel activity. It could be CRM data, past purchaser lists, essentially any kind of data that you own. So whether we're building audiences or driving intent, the actions that people take or don't take tells us a lot about the quality of the audience and how likely they are to purchase. So we can learn from this and hone in on our targeting efforts based off of this data. And I do want to call that out. The actions that people take or don't take, right, is critical. Earlier, I talked about that legacy expectation, right? I talked about how clicks were the goal of display campaigns, but we learn just as much from people clicking as we do from people not clicking, right? Whether we're learning about how people are viewing the ad and still visiting the website, or we're learning about how our audiences are viewing ads and not taking action to come to the website. In each of those opportunities, there's an optimization that can be done to find more quality audiences. If it's people who are engaging on the site, let's find more people like them. If it's people who are coming to the site but aren't engaging, then we don't want to spend time or budget wasting it on those folks. And instead, we can find those efficiencies in the target audience. And again, it all boils down to that first party data. So, here's a couple different instances of how this data can be beneficial. The same pixel, right, that we place for on-site retargeting can also capture interesting on-site data like segmentation analysis, behavioral and demo insights that can be essentially extrapolated for probably future campaigns. Customer list, shopping cart abandonment insights, checkout analysis, all that kind of stuff. Second is that we get better insight into the engagement activity that's taking place on your site. Similarly, understanding what is facilitating conversions on your site or identifying where that attrition is taking place, right? So generating that business intelligence. And this can essentially help identify how and where to improve the content on your website or determine a better click path of conversion. The third, first party data is great because it can generate lookalike audiences, which give further concentric layers of effectiveness for that data, almost like a halo effect, and provide you more opportunity to generate those conversions. And then lastly, utilizing these insights outside of display, as this audience and business intelligence can essentially cross-pollinate to be looped into other existing campaigns like search and social and native, etc. So again, a lot of different key pieces that we can use here as advertisers. So this essentially just wraps about everything up. I think what we learned here today is that display in 2018, 2019, it's really different from where it started 25 years ago, back in 1994. That legacy expectation of display might have been to generate clicks, but honestly, that just simply isn't true or necessary anymore. View-through reporting lets us understand 100% how an audience performs when they are exposed to an ad. Cross-device attribution or targeting and audience segmentation provides greater clarity into that path to conversion. While retargeting then allows us to treat display as that full funnel platform, essentially finding efficiencies in the bidding process. So everything we've discussed essentially basically points to how display both builds audiences and drives intent, right? Those dual purposes of display in 2019, while also improving campaign performance across other channels like search and social. So with that, I hope you found the information useful. As always, please do not hesitate to reach out directly to me. You're welcome to email me or call me directly with questions, or you can reach out to your local sales leads with any questions. But thank you for your time. I do hope you stay warm. Have a good rest of your day. And if anybody's traveling here in the next couple of weeks for the holidays, safe travels. Thanks.